Murder News.
We're here with a very special guest today, my friend Cass, joining us all the way from Austin, Texas, to tell us a murder story with Murder Mosas.
Cheers.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Cass. You're such an amazing storyteller already. Like, you have the best stories, period. But you also have all these fantastic murder stories, like, an unusual number of murders.
Yeah.
It's a little scary.
I've just been lucky not to be involved in any of those stories personally, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. I'm glad that you're safe given like all these like, questionable figures in your life. Like I'm glad that you're safe and with us. Well, let's hear it. Let's hear this story.
Okay, so this story, it took place. My only connection to it was that I had worked for the guy who was murdered. So he used to be my boss years ago. He was a nightclub manager, and a few years after that we had left is when it happened. So I didn't know the guy who murdered him. But I wasn't particularly surprised to hear that somebody had murdered him. Just kind of the way he treated people that worked there. It was one day you're gonna, piss off the wrong person and they're just gonna snap. But he sort of had that personality that would be more likely to do that. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
yeah. So what happens is, so my personal story of this, when I worked there, we had to go out and like pass out flyers for the nightclub. And we were not paid for this time. So a lot of people didn't like to do it. And one day, me and my girlfriend were like, we're not going to do this. We have something else to do. We go into the club later that night, and he fires us for not showing up to an unpaid shift. Like
Wow.
we're not scheduled. It's just, so we were pretty upset about that. I can understand anybody. I don't know what this guy was fired for, but he was a bar back who worked at the club, and he's like 20 years old, young kid. Um, like ROTC high school kind of kid, I guess kind of nerdy. And the manager's like this jock who just, um, wasn't the kindest person. So he ends up firing the bar back, and the bar back plans out, so about 2 weeks later, he's like, I'm going to kill him. And what he does is he follows him home from the nightclub one night, and he doesn't follow him to his apartment, but just to the building. And he's sitting in his car and he waits for a light to come on. It's about 3 in the morning when bar people get home. So he sees a light comes on and he's like, okay, that's the apartment. He climbs up to the second story balcony, breaks into that apartment, but the person in there isn't the manager. Yeah. So it's this totally unrelated woman who's a bartender as well. So getting home at the same hour. And unfortunately, she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Oh no.
Yeah. And this guy's so dead set on murdering his prior or his former boss that he thinks that if he lets her go, it's gonna spoil his plan. So I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he watched too many movies, but he ties her up and then he hits her over the head with a gun, like the butt of the gun, and she's knocked unconscious. He's thinking she's dead, and so he's like, okay, see myself out, whatever. I don't know if he stole anything. I don't think he did from her place. But as he's leaving, she becomes conscious again, and so he's like, well, shit, yeah. Um, Horrible thing, this innocent bystander. Um, he ties a bag around her head and she suffocates that way in her
Oh my
apartment.
God.
Yeah.
Poor thing.
She lived in the same building as the manager. So 2 more days go by, and he figures out which is the right apartment. He goes back before his boss, former boss, gets off work. He's hiding, based on his confession. He's hiding in the bedroom with his boss's cat. And when his boss comes in the apartment, he's thinking to himself, like I can't back out now. His boss walks in, calls out for his cat, and instead of the cat coming out to greet him, it's this guy with a gun, shoots him. Um, he tries to get away, shoots him again. He falls to the ground. And he's like going for the front door, and then he shoots him in the back of the head, and that's it.
Wow. Like it's so wild because you would think that because there was a murder at this apartment complex, like 2 days before that the police would be watching the place
Well,
or
I don't think that
nothing?
they found out about the murder before. That's why he didn't shoot her, because that would have drawn attention.
Okay,
So
I
yeah,
see. Oh,
her,
so like nobody found her or knew she was missing?
so when they did finally find her, obviously they had found the other guy as well. This one detective was like, maybe these are connected, and so they asked this guy who had already confessed, and he was like, yeah, that. So this is what happened with that. So
Oh,
after he murders his boss, he steals his car, his wallet, his gym bag. It's a flashy Nissan, so that's kind of hard to hide. He
oh
takes
my
it to his
God.
ex-girlfriend's house.
Like he thought he was going to get away with stealing the car and
Yeah.
killing two people.
Well, so how he gets caught was he takes that car to his ex-girlfriend's house, parks it in the garage, and her dad finds it. And I mean, these kids are just out of high school. They're 20. Pretty young. So the dad
Oh,
calls the cops and is like, "Hey, this has to be stolen." And they're like, "Not only is it stolen, it's registered to this guy who was just found murdered. So
dead.
let's talk about the car." And then they trace it back to the murderer guy.
Wow.
um, yeah, I read a little bit more about what happened to him after sentencing and whatnot. So he's obviously found guilty. He confesses to both murders. But he goes to jail, and there's one prison guard who just wants to pick on this
Hmm.
guy, the murderer. He's like, "Oh, you think you're a badass because you killed two people, but you killed a woman, so you better hope I'm not working here Saturday. Maybe there's like less surveillance or whatnot." So this prison guard is just after this kid. I mean, after this guy who murdered two people.
I mean, I kind of can't blame him.
Well, it's his rap. The prison guard's rap ends up being less than noble. So
Okay.
he plants drugs in his bed 2 times on 2 separate occasions, and then trades some drugs to another inmate to fight this kid. So by the time they come to sentencing in his murder trial, they've got all this evidence. Oh, you've got drugs. You've hidden drugs twice. You got caught with those. You started a fight. You attacked another inmate. Like this guy is dangerous. Whereas I kind of see the situation as it being more of like a not a crime of passion, but I really feel like this kid felt like he was done wrong when he murdered this guy, and he made a
Right.
horrible decision. But
Really bad decision. And
yeah, innocent people shouldn't die. But
yeah, and I mean, obviously, it's completely terrible that he murdered his boss. Like, you don't murder somebody for firing you. But then this poor woman who's just getting off work late, minding her own business,
yeah,
hardworking, like at a bar, and just happens to live in the same building as this guy.
yeah, no, it's yeah. Well, so he obviously found guilty, like we said, and then sentenced to death because there. This is pertinent just because he's not on death row currently. So he's sentenced to death, but his appeal is based on other witnesses while he's in jail. Like, hey, those drugs were planted, and like not only do I know it, my cellmate knows it. I didn't start a fight. The guy that he apparently like started a fight with weighs like 230 pounds, and this kid weighs like 120. So it was like
Right.
he didn't just go up and attack some guy who weighs 100 pounds more than him.
So,
But
do you know like how much the drugs affected his sentencing? Because it just feels like murdering two people would be so much more of a serious offense than drugs.
I think it was just used to the drugs and the fighting were just used to show that like, hey, like this, who does this?
I see.
Murders two people and then gets caught with drugs in a fight in prison.
I see. So like they're painting a picture that he's just like a bad guy, which
Exactly.
I mean he
Which,
is.
you can't argue that he killed two people.
Right.
Um, but apparently, the Texas Supreme Court thinks that that's a valid argument. The guard was fired, or he retired because they found all kinds of drug paraphernalia in his car and heard stories about him trading drugs to inmates.
They were actually his drugs.
I mean, it was just I thought I never like looked back on that story. I looked into it recently a little bit because I didn't know what had happened to him. After death row, had he been murdered or had he been put to death or not?
Right.
And then I found out that he's no longer on death row. He's just writing all these appeals, and we'll see what happens. I mean, but Yeah, so that was the story of my boss being murdered.
Wow, that's so wild. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story with us today, and also coining the phrase murder mosas, which we'll definitely be using from now on.
Yeah, I ran out, so I'm drinking White Claw.
Yeah. I got some of those in the fridge too. I drove all the way to the US before the quarantine for them.
Oh wow, I guess they don't sell them in Canada.
They are not a Canadian thing. And fortunately, they're like everywhere in New York State. So you just have to cross over the border and then it's like White Claw galore.
Nice. Yeah, I'm not proud of it.
All right, Cass. Well, thank you so much. You'll have to come back for one of your other murder stories to tell us soon.
Oh, absolutely. Take
All
care.
right, bye.
Murder, murder news.